Today's daf is daf Lamed Hey, and we'll start from the top of the Yomid. We learned the Mishnah yesterday, and the Mishnah on the bottom of Lamed Daled, Amid Beis, addresses a whole bunch of different issues, most of which we'll pick up in the Sugi itself. So I don't think we need really a review of the Mishnah, because as we go through the Sugi, we'll be reviewing the Mishnah in any event. And we begin with the question of identifying the Esrog. The Torah says pre-Eitz Hadar. And somehow we have to understand from this pasuk that there's a reference, or shall we say an allusion, to an Esrog. And the Gemara is going to give the following possibility, and then other possibilities. The first possibility that the Gemara investigates is Eitz Shetam Eitzo Upirio Shava. It means that when the Torah says pre-Eitz, the Torah is comparing the pre to the Eitz. That means the wood or the bark of the tree and the pre are being compared to each other, and they have a similar taste. And when we look at various peros that grow, and we try to identify a peri whose taste is similar to that of the eitz itself, the wood itself, have the omer zeh esrog. We find this with regard to an esrog. So, for example, a lemon, which is very similar to an esrog, yet it doesn't have the same tam as the eitz, but the tam of the esrog is similar to that of the eitz. And truth be told, very few people will enjoy an esrog. It doesn't really have a good taste. I mean, some experts know how to make it jelly out, but it's a whole process. So the Gemara says, if this is your criterion, you need something that the eitz and the pre have the same or a similar taste, then v'ema pilpulin. What about certain kinds of spices that grow, peppers and other kinds of vegetables? And the Gemara is now going to prove that in the case of pilpulin, we have another expression, another example of this phenomenon of tam ha'etz kitam ha'pri. Kirisani, we learned in a brisa, Hoya Rabbi Meir Omer, mimashma shenemar unitatem kol eitz. This is the opening pasuk in the parsha of Orla. The Torah says that the fruits of the tree during the first 3 years of the tree producing fruit are asur, both b'achila and b'hanua. And the strange thing about this pasuk is, if it says unitatem kol eitz, then when the Torah goes in and says that you will not be able to eat it, and the tree and the fruit of the tree is forbidden, why then, asks Rabbi Meir, Eini odeshu eitz machol? Why did the Torah have to specify that this is an eitz machol? The Torah says unitatem kol eitz machol, but the Torah says don't eat it. Obviously, it's an eitz machol. It must be a tree that produces edible fruit. So why did the Torah have to add what seems to be a superfluous word, and that is eitz machol, to describe the eitz as an eitz machol? We know that we're talking about an eitz machol because the Torah explicitly tells us that we're enjoined from eating the fruits of that tree. So the Gemara answers, this is Rabbi Meir's interpretation and justification of the extra word machol here. Eitz, shetam eitzo upirio shava. And we would anticipate that if you're looking for a case of a tree whose fruit has a similar taste to the tree, Rabbi Meir would have given the example of esrog, but that's not the example he chose. Avi omer zeh pilpulin. And Rabbi Meir wants to tell us that the extra word machol here, describing the eitz, that there's some similarity between the machol, meaning the pre, and the eitz itself, is an allusion to pilpulin. This is a very, very important breakthrough. The Torah went out of its way to describe the eitz as an eitz machol, which was totally unnecessary in order to include pilpulin in the Iser of Orla. And then Rabbi Meir adds a kind of an agadic statement, Ein Eretz Yisrael chaser klum. You'll find in Eretz Yisrael, because the mitzvah of Orla primarily is in Eretz Yisrael, although again, there is Orla in Chutzotz, that's halacha l'mot Sinai. But the simple interpretation of Torah Shebechsav indicates Ki tavo el haaretz, that we talk about Eretz Yisrael, and Shenemar, the Torah describes Eretz Yisrael as lo pechsar kolba. Kolba. You can find everything in Eretz Yisrael, even peppers. So that we see that Tama, Eitz Ketama Pri is not necessarily limited exclusively to esrog. We could apply to pilpul as well. So why not say that I could take a pilpul and use it as my pre-eitz hadar for the mitzvah l'kacham lachem? So Gemara answers Hasa mishum d'lo efshar. That in truth, on a purely theoretical level, you are right, and peppers would fit the description of Tama Eitz Ketama Pri. But Hechi Navid, how do we implement this mitzvah? How do we fulfill this mitzvah? Ninkot Chada. Let's say we take one pepper. So the Gemara says, Lo minkar lekichasim. A pepper is very small, and it's not obvious to the spectator that you are taking a pepper. It's lost somewhere in the shuffle. It's completely covered by his hand, and certainly by the other minim of the eged. And the Gemara assumes that you've got to show and illustrate to the people around you that you're taking these four minim. Bilko treo tlasa. So maybe we could suggest taking more of these pilpulim. So we gather together 2 or 3 of them, and then it's minkar milsa. You could see that he's taking them. But the Torah says pri, and pri is in the singular. Echad. It's one Amar Achman of lo shnayim mishlosh peros hilkach lo efsh. Now let's just summarize. There was a havamina that pilpul would be parted from orla. And the reason for that is that the tree on which the pilpul grows is relatively small. Other fruits grow on very tall trees, as a general rule. Now we have berries and the like that grow on small trees, on almost what you call bushes, but they have the status of a yerek, meaning that's called pri hadam. And eitz is a taller tree. So Rashi explains that if we did not have this extra pasuk, eitz machal, we would have excluded pilpul from Arla, because we would have assumed that it's not considered a pri ha'etz, but rather it's a pri ha'adam. It grows on a very low tree. Tosfos, on the other hand, offers another answer to the same question as Rashi. He's not satisfied with Rashi's answer. He thinks that the Hamamina was that pilpul would be excluded from Arla because of what Tosfos called sofo liyabich. In a certain period of time, very relatively short period of time, it dries up. Once it dries up, it's no longer edible. And something that is edible for only a short, limited period of time in the Hamamina, before this drasha of Eitz Machol, we would not consider it as a pri, as kol eitz, that is Eitz Machol pri. Why? Because a pri will last for a long time until it gets dry, but not good. In any event, whether you take Rashi or Tosfos, there was a Havamina that pilpul will be excluded from Orla, Kamach Balan. We derive from this pasuk that pilpul is chayiv in Orla, and that's because Tam Eitzo Upirio Shava. We can't use it for the Dal Minim because Mimanav Shach doesn't have a Lakicha Minkara with a Heker. It's too small, and the Torah says take one and not more than one. Now the Gemara goes back to the Brisa. Rebbe says, Al Tikri Hadam. Rebbe has another derivation from this pasuk creates Hadar to prove that the Torah has in mind an Esrog. You don't read it as Hadar with a kamatz under the hay, a kamatz under the dalid, but rather Hadir, meaning you put a pasach under the hay and a chirik under the dalid. We don't have to add the yud. In the printed Gemara, they add a yud just to make sure that we understand. And al pi drasha, the way we interpret Torah Shebeksav is that we can change the vowels, and that's what we're going to do. And this is going to be an allusion for the Esrog. Why so? A deer is a place where the animals are brought in, and that's where the animals are. Let's call it a corral. Ma deer zeh yesh bo gedol u'ktanim. You have all sorts of animals in the same corral. You've got larger animals, you have smaller animals, you have tmimim, you have animals that are unblemished, ubali mumin, animals that have blemishes. Achinami, we're looking now for a fruit that can be described in the same way. Yesh bo gedolim, uktanim, tmimim, ubali mumin. You look at the esrog tree, and you find all these kinds of esrogim. So the Gemara objects. Atu shar peros. Let's take a look at a lemon tree. Let's move gedolim, uktanim, tmimim, ubali mumin. There are all sorts of sizes, and they're blemished and non-blemished on a tree of apples or oranges or lemons. This does not single out an esrog tree as being very unique. Elahachi comes. So the Gemara offers to revamp Rebbe's statement. Ad Elahachi comes. Ad sheboim tanim adayin gdolim kayam. Let's look at the corral and the animals therein, and we'll find that there are older animals that are still occupying their places in the corral, even as newborn animals join the corral. So you've got a coexistence of the older generation and the younger generation. That's where esrog is very unique. Why? Because, as we'll soon see, the Gemara points out about the esrog tree that it's dar v'gadel b'ilano shtayim o shalosh shanim, meaning that unlike other fruits that eventually will fall off the tree or disintegrate on the tree, the esrog lasts on the tree for years, 2 years, even 3 years. And that means that there are new esrogim, young sprouts, that are arriving on the tree, and they coexist with the older esrogim. And that's what we derive from the word hadar that we read as hadir. It's unique to an esrog. Because other fruit trees, you won't see. Right. They fall off. Rabbi Avo Amar, he finds a different way of learning esrog. Al tikre hadar ela hadar. It's not a beautiful fruit, because there are many beautiful fruits, but rather it's a fruit that dwells. What does that mean? Davar shedar be'ilana mishana l'shana. It lasts on the tree from 1 year to the next. And that could only be an esrog. And finally, we have Ben Azai, al tikri hadar ela idur. Sometimes we replace a hay with an aleph. And by doing so, we produce the word idur. You follow? We take out the hay and put it in aleph. And what is idur? The word idur, shekem b'loshen yevani, korim l'mayim idur. And the Mefarshim point out here that there's also a Targum Onkelos that seems to identify mayim, water, as idur. in Aramaic. So apparently there's a similarity between various languages in which Mayim is called Idur in various languages. Now, what does Mayim have to do with the Esrog? The answer is Ezo hi shegodel al kol Mayim evyom esrog. What's unique about the Esrog tree, in addition to the descriptions that we had until now, that they last on the tree for years, they also grow on two different sources of water: natural rainfall, and irrigation. And that's called Godel al Kol Mayim. Now, as we leave this sugya, I would like to mention here the Rambam's introduction to Pirush Mishnayos. Rambam has a principle, and he formulates the following principle. He says, all the Pirushim, all the various interpretations of what the Torah refers to, like, for example, Totafos, and Chazal say that's tefillin. All of these are Pirushim Mekubalim Mimoshe Misina. And Moshe Rabbeinu received at Har Sinai the Pirushim, the interpretations of the words of the Torah. And therefore, we know, even before this whole Gemara that we learned, says the Rambam, that an esrog is an esrog. And no one is going to deny that. We have a tradition that dates back to Moshe Rabbeinu Har Sinai, says the Rambam, that the pirush of pre-Eitz Hadar is an esrog. So the Rambam then asks himself, so why do we have this whole sugya over here? And the Rambam has another principle here, that we try to find in the Torah itself an indication that this pirush, which Moshe Rabbeinu received at Har Sinai, is reflected in the words of the Torah. It's what you call in the Rambam's language, asmachtos lekabbalosam. We have a tradition. We receive the transmission that pre-Eitz Hadar is an esrog. Nobody denies that. That's unanimous. But we want to find asmachtos. Can we look back in the Torah and try to find some allusion, some indication that this pirush is correct? And that's where we have the various opinions, how to interpret the word hadar. Moving on. If an esrog comes from an Asherah tree that's been worshipped as an idol, or a city, most of the members of the city worshipped idols, and we have to destroy the city, and they took an esrog from that city, it's possible. My taima, Gemara says, Eman de l'sreifakoi, ki tuse mechtas shiura. Means that since in the cases of an Asherah and Ira Nidachas, the mitzvah sreifa, that which is designated and ultimately will be burnt is considered already burnt, and therefore doesn't have the shear of an esrog, which is either, if you remember from yesterday's discussion in the Mishnah, on Lamed Daled Amud Beis, either a walnut or an egg. It doesn't have the shear of an esrog. Now, I want to mention to you that Tosfos, back on Daf Lamed, had a girsa that is different than our girsa. And the Gemara answered, why is it that an esrog shel Asherah shel Ira Nidachas, or for that matter, any of the Daled meaning from those two, are possible because of mitzvah ba'avir. And Tosfos rejects this girsa. He says it's not a correct girsa. However, if you happen to have Rabbeinu Chananan in your Gemara, all the way on the left, and you count down approximately 10 lines, it says, the first word is esrog in the line, then it says, Shal Asherah, Shal Ira Nidachas Posel. Do you see the next few words? Mishum Dahavile Mitzvah Haba Bavera. So the girsa, which Tosfos rejects outright, is in fact the girsa of Rabbeinu Chananel. And all the Mefarshim jump on this Rabbeinu Chananel. How can you talk about mitzvah baba avera? Mitzvah baba avera means that I was only able to obtain the mitzvah article, meaning the chefetz shel mitzvah, through an avera. I stole it. But in the case of a lulav or an esrog that was worshipped on a tree, that's not a mitzvah haba machnas avera. That is a coincidence of an avera and a chefetz shel mitzvah, but it's not ba avera. And Rabbeinu Chananel is really breaking new grounds here. He's got a broader definition of mitzvah ba avera, which includes any chefetz shel mitzvah that has a relationship to an avera. The avera was done and performed in this object that disqualifies the object. So if avodah zarah was worshipped in this tree, then the daled minim from that tree, the esrog, the lulav, whatever it is a mitzvah above avera. But Tosfos rejects this, probably for this reason, because that's not mitzvah above avera. Mitzvah above avera means the only way he could set up the mitzvah, the conduit to set up the mitzvah was an avera, which is not true here. If there was no worship of avodah zarah, I could still take the lulav and fulfill the mitzvah, the esrog. The Mishnah states, "Shall orla apostle, my time." Okay, now we're getting into the real nitty gritty of today's sugya. Why is an esrog shall orla apostle? Pligi ba Rabbi Chia bar Ovin v'Rabbi Asi. Presumably, we don't know which of these two Amoraim holds which shita, which opinion. The Gemara later on is going to try to clarify and do the matching. But right now, Chada, or one of the two says, Lefi she'ein ba heter achila. And I don't know if you like to underline things in your Gemara. This would be a good example, something you should underline, because we're going to come back to this over and over and over again. Lefi she'ein ba heter achila. Because an esrog shel arla, like all of arla, is asur ba'achila u'ba'ana. You can get no benefit whatsoever. Arla is prohibited, period. And we need an esrog. It's got to be roi yeshbo achila, yeshbo heter achila. Rashi, approximately 15 lines down from the top of the page, Lefi she'ein ba heter achila. Have you found it?
Yeah.
Rachmana Amar lachem. The Torah says l'kachem lachem, haroi lachem, v'chol darkei hada'as. Lachem means that it's fitting for you to get benefit from it in any way that you choose, which is obviously not the case in an esrog shel arla, which is also ba'ana. V'chad Amar. The other opinion is lefi she'ein ba din mama. Rashi, she'eino shava pruta. You cannot claim ownership on an esrog shel arla, and the Torah says lochem, it's got to be yours. Dasiri hanahu, something that is completely enjoined from any benefit whatsoever is worthless. Hilkach lav shalachem. Now, by way of introduction, because again, when I learned this sugya, nobody gave me this introduction, so I had to work overtime. But maybe I can make life easier for you, where I could make it easier for me. Our whole sugya is going to revolve around the following question. Is it possible that both of these opinions would agree that we certainly need ownership? That wasn't an issue. The issue would be, in addition to ownership, is there a second precondition, and it's got to be yesh ba heter. I don't know if you followed that. If you didn't, it's fine, because that's what we're going to work through this. The Gemara in the Havamim thought that these two shitas are mutually exclusive. It's either A or B. Man de boy heter achila, lo boy din mama. Uman de boy did mamon, lo boy het achila. You need either one or the other. The Ritva is bothered by this whole sukkah. Why is the Gemara looking high and low for an explanation for the disqualification of an esrog shel arla? Why not apply the same logic and the same reasoning that we apply to an esrog of asher or iranidachas, namely kitusei mechta shiura? Namely, arla has to be burnt. Yeah, arla is ton sreifa. It's Isuria no, and you have to burn it. So why is Gemara looking high and low for these reasons? And the Ritva comes up with an amazing chiddush. He says that the Gemara, for some reason, is of the opinion that an esrog shel arla is kosher for the balance of the other 6 days of Yantiv. It's only possible the first day. And he explains that if it was midin streifa, that it would be possible all 7 days because it doesn't have a shear. It's kitusei mechta shiura. But if on the other hand, the psul is because you're lacking in lachem, so that requirement for lachem only applies when? On the first day of Sukkah. Do you remember that? That was the first Sukkah that we started in this parak. That Bishlema, Yavesh, I understand why Yavesh, it's not Hadar, it's Pasal Kol Shiva. But Gazel, the Gemara says, I don't know why it should be Pasal past the first day, because there's no requirement of Lachem after the first day. So the Ritva is pointing out that this discussion here, man, the boy did Mammon, that according to one opinion, Arla is not Lachem, it doesn't have a Din Mammon. Rashi says it's not Shalva Pruta. You can't get any benefit from it. You can't sell it. It's worthless. Says the Ritva, that would only apply the first day. But then an esrog shel arla should be kosher for the balance of Yontif. It's not lacking in hadar. It's not chaser. It's not missing a piece. It's a perfectly beautiful esrog. It's just that it's the first 3 years of the produce of the tree. So the Ritva has to deal with this question, why the sreifa aspect of arla is different than the sreifa aspect of Asher and Iranidachas. And again, this is a sugya unto itself, but this is a sugya in Masechet Tmura about the difference between the Srafim and Nikbarim. I'm just mentioning it if you ever get a chance to. Nikbar means to bury. There are certain things that you could just bury. You don't have to burn it.
It belongs to you anyway. You just have much.
Also belongs to the members of the city. I'm not sure if I understand what you're saying. I mean, it's not yours in Irani. That's because it's told straight, but you can't benefit from it. Same thing applies to Arla. So Arla doesn't have a din mammon, Rashi says, because you can't benefit from it. You cannot benefit from it. It's worthless. And Isuria no ain't a mammon.
Person is part of the Irani.
It doesn't matter. Any person in the world is also no one's allowed to enjoy any benefit from the Irani Damas. Whether he worshipped or he didn't worship, whether he lives in the city or he doesn't. So now we get to the Gemara's Kash. Then our Mishnah says, Shall Truma Tmeya Pasul. If you have Truma that was contaminated, you cannot use that esrog for the mitzvah of Daled Minim. What do we do with Truma Tmeya? We're not allowed to eat it. Even a Kohen is enjoined from eating it. It has to go up in flames. Shaper, now we understand why an esrog of Truma Tmeya is invalid. You're allowed to take Truma Tmeya, burn it, and cook your food in a pot over the flame. So you could get benefit from Truma Tmeya. Although Truma Tmeya is torn straight, you have to burn it, but nevertheless you can benefit from it. And if you're telling me that the reason why you disqualify an esrog shel arla is because Ein bo did mama, Truma Tmeya has a din mamon. So why would you exclude Arla and Truma Tmeya? I understand you can exclude Arla because Arla, no way, no how can you benefit from. But Truma Tmeya, where there's a mitzvah strafe, the paradox is that the mitzvah strafe is the matter that allows you to have hana. But in any event, you're allowed to have hana from Truma Tmeya. And the Gemara now buckles under. Ella, says the Gemara, there was never a machlokas about this condition that has to be fulfilled. It's critical that it has to be royal achila. He pligi, the entire machlokas was bedin mama. Mar sover het achila be'inon. According to one opinion, the more lenient opinion, although it's true you need a het achila, but din mama lo be'inon. There's no requirement of mama. Umar sovar din mama nabi bina. We have a secondary, a number two condition, and that is mama. We need to check off two boxes in order for the esrog to be kosher. It's got to be yesh bo het achila, and it has to have a din mama. But everybody agrees that it has to have a heter achila. And therefore, Truma Tmeya has no heter achila. We have to burn Truma Tmeya. The machlokes as to whether or not Truma Tmeya would be possible under a different category, which again is irrelevant, it's purely theoretical. We've already disqualified Truma Tmeya because ain't by heter achila. But theoretically, you could ask, would there be another reason why Truma Tmeya is invalid for Dal Minim? And that is because we require mamon. And the answer to that would be, well, he does have mamon, and he does have ownership, and he can benefit from Truma Tmeya, as opposed to Arla. Arla has two strikes against him. Number one, Arla is ein bo din achila, ein bo het achila. And that itself automatically would disqualify the esrog according to all opinions. You want to ask a theoretical question, and we passel an esrog under another category, an esrog shel Arla under a second category, namely ein bo din mamon, because it's also by no, and it's not worth a pruta. That's a machlokes whether or not mamon is a requirement with regard to esrog. But everyone agrees that you need a heter achila. Now the Gemara is going to look for a case where there is a heter achila, but there's no din mamon. How do you come up with such a case? My beinayu, ika beinayu, my sisheni b'Yerushalayim. I'll leave it to Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir holds. Again, you have to write this down. I mean, there's no shortcuts here. I'm sorry. Rabbi Meir holds that my sisheni mamon gavoa. That when I take my sisheni to Yerushalayim, it is owned by Almighty God. It's not mine. There's no mamon. On the other hand, yesh bo het achila. That's exactly what you do with my sisheni. You bring it to Yerushalayim and you eat it in Yerushalayim. And therefore, an esrog of Ma'aser Sheni b'Yerushalayim is kosher. That you can exclude and disqualify an esrog if you don't own the esrog. Then, according to Rabbi Meir, who holds that Ma'aser Sheni b'Yerushalayim is mamon gavah, you don't own the esrog, is Ma'aser Sheni mamon gavah, and it's possible. Again, according to the Rabbanan, who disagree with Rabbi Meir, they hold Ma'aser Sheni is mamon bailan. You have personal ownership. So the Miman of Shach, an esrog shel Ma'aser Sheni in Yerushalayim is kosher, either because yesh bo heter mama, or yesh bo, or you have ownership. Yesh bo din mama. But there's one Madiyama who would say that even Rabbi Meir would be machshir an esrog shel Ma'aser Sheni Yerushalayim, even though Rabbi Meir holds that Ma'aser Sheni Yerushalayim is mamon gavah, but we don't have a din mama. All we need is heter achila, which we have. Histayim, now the Gemara wants to see if we can match it up. The Rabbi Asi, he's the one, the Omar Lefisha Ein Bo Din Mamon, that he adds another condition, and that's why he excludes Arla, because you don't have ownership over Arla, it's Yisrei Hana. Because the Omar Rav Asi, I'm going to prove it to you from the following statement of Rav Asi. Esrog shel Ma'aser Sheni l'divrei Rabbi Meir Ein Adam Yotzi Yidei Vasa B'Yantiv. Because Rabbi Meir holds that Masechet of Yerushalayim is Mamon Gava. It's not your personal property. And if you have no ownership, says Rav Asi, then Rabbi Meir certainly would have, Lishitasa would have to disqualify Masechet in Yerushalayim, even though this esrog is allowed to be eaten. It's a mitzvah to eat it. Well, the Divrei Chachamim, they hold Mamon Bailin, Adam Yotzim and Yidei Vasa B'Yantiv, because Mimanavshach. Either because Yesh Bo Heter Achilu, which it has, or alternatively, because of Din Mama, which it has, because we're going according to the Rabbanan, who that Masechet Yerushalayim is Mamon Bailin. Is Tistayim, this is a final proof that Rabbi Asi is the one who requires a Din Mamon, and it's not enough that you have a Heter Achilu. So Masechet Yerushalayim, according to Rabbi Meir, says Rabbi Asi, is possible for esrog, even though it has a Din Mamon, but we have a second condition, namely, you need, even though, it has a Heter Achila, but we have a second condition, and that is Yesh Bo Din Mamon. According to Rabbi Meir, Masechet Yerushalayim is Mamon Gavoa, you don't own it. Kufa, Omer of Asi, esrog shel Masechet, with Divrei Rabbi Meir, Einon Yotzi Decha Vasa B'Yantiv, because it has a Heter Achila, no Achlokas, is whether it has a Din Mamon, you have Mamon, Bailus. Says Rabbi Asi, Matzah shel Masechet, L'divrei Rabbi Meir, Ein Adam Yotzei Ba Yidecha Vasa B'Pesach. He took his grains of Masechet, first, second, fourth, and fifth years, and he brought it to Yerushalayim. He made matzah out of it. Says Rabbi Asi, according to Rabbi Meir, he will not be able to use that matzah of Masechet for the mitzvah of matzah. Why not? It has a din achila. The answer is that Rabbi Meir holds that Masechet Yerushalayim is Mamon Gavoa, so it doesn't have a din Mamon.
That's the Machlokas.
Whether you need Mamon, you mean
no,
what? I didn't follow.
Masechet Yerushalayim, according to one opinion, is.
There is violence. There is ownership. That's the Chacham. It's Mamon Gavoa. Belongs to Hashem. It's not yours.
Then how do we pass?
Oh, I'm kind of.
In other words, okay.
Like for example, let's say I have Masechet Yerushalayim. Can I be Mekadosh Nisha? According to Rabbi Meir, no, it's not mine.
No.
According to Chachamim, yes. Can I use it for an esrog? Says Rabbi Asi. According to Rabbi Meir, no. I don't have a din mamon. According to Chachamim, yes. Can I eat the matzah that's made of Masechet Yerushalayim? Depends on Rabbi Meir and Chacham, according to Rabbi Asi. Now, what about challah? Isa shel Masechet. We made a dough out of Masechet Yerushalayim. L'divrei Rabbi Meir p'tura min challah. Why? Because the Torah says ariso seichem. It's got to be your dough. Pop has dough, right? PhD. But the Chachamim chayeves b'challah, because the Chachamim hold that Masechet Yerushalayim is Mamon Bailam. You have personal, private ownership of Masechet Yerushalayim. Adarabah. That's how you're going to eat it. Maskif law, Rav Papa Bishleim Isa. I understand in challah ksiv it says Rachis Hariso Seichem. It's got to be your dough. Esrog Navi, I understand that it's got to be your esrog. B'ksiv lachem. Look out from lachem. Yishel lachem. Ela matzah. Miksiv matzaschem? I invite you to my Seder table, and I give you my matzah. Does it have to be yours? Do you have to make a kinyan on it? Amar Rav Bar Shmuel, became a Rav Yemar Bar Shalmei, Asya Lechem Lechem. We have a Gzeres Shavah that compares dough or challah with dough for matzah. Asya Lechem Lechem Ksiv Hacha. In regard to matzah, the Torah says Lechem Oni Uksiv Hasam.